Three, two, one.
Welcome to another podcast. This is Gray Stage Podcast, episode number 39. We're in the Gray Stage book, authored by Greg Fernandez Jr. We're in chapter 16 called The Gray Shame. The Gray Shame. This is part 8 of the Gray Shame chapter, the largest chapter of Greg's book. Lots in here, lots to cover. Once again, we'll be going through it audio, narrating, and reading the book version and stopping every couple of paragraphs with some confirmation, with some comments, I guess. So, Greg, we're on the bottom of page 165 for those following along in the hard softcover book. Bottom of page 165. Once again, we're in chapter 16. This is the final chapter of the book, but it's the longest chapter that you wrote. A lot of information in it. It's a 50 page chapter, I believe. And we'll go as far as we can here, and we'll talk about this. You get into a lot of good information on this chapter, Greg, and I'm looking forward to this episode.
Well, thank you, my friend. I'm going to set my timer here like I forgot. But yeah, we'll go ahead and go how we normally go. So
Perfect.
All right. Let me just pull this up. There we go.
Well, last episode we talked a lot about David's family. This segment here today is mainly going to be a lot of information with Comel, David's wife, and her family, and also some other things that were going on at the time on her side. So this will kind of clear everything up on some of the questions that were going on at this time of the year. Once again, October, September timeframe, 2014, where all this was going on. Continuing at the bottom of page 165, Casey Morrow worked with Comel at the Melrose at Methodist Hospital. Morrow was also part of a like-minded dietitian group with Comel. According to what Morrow told Detective Michael Teets, quote, the group would get together and talk about nutrition and diet topics, end quote. Morrow spoke with Comel once a week up until the last week of September or the first week of October 2014. She sent 2 emails to Comel, but there was no response. Morrow stated she did not receive Comel's new phone number, which was changed in 2014, October 2014. So just to clarify there for the listeners, she was a dietitian. She was working with what Mind Health. What was her website?
Well, actually, I think it was Mind, Body, Soul.
Mind, Body, Soul.
Yeah.
A website, and she was doing dietitian work and healthy eating and healthy. Once again, her and David were very much into healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, and sometimes we get out about this information of all this rampant drug and alcohol abuse and all this. They used recreational drugs. I think that was about it. Maybe did some drinking here and there, but both were very healthy individuals. She was attending this dietitian group with Casey, and the last she heard from her was the end of September and the beginning of October. So we get this scenario or narrative that they started cutting off communication. While that is maybe indirectly true, they did change their phone numbers and started behaving and acting differently with close members of the family and the inner circle of folks because of what was all going on with the contract and whatnot. And I think this is one that maybe slipped through the cracks. She probably just didn't respond. Comel didn't give her the new phone number, but we can't take that as a shot that she did not give her the new phone number, on purpose, some kind of a dig or something. There was a lot of people I'm sure she didn't give the new phone number to when they were going through all this change. So that's why there was no response. I'm not making an excuse for Comel, but they were moving very quickly this time of the year with everything going on. That it was common that they didn't get back to people. It was common they didn't give the new phone number. When their cell phone service changed and things like that. So a lot of this was reactionary. It wasn't done on purpose as far as changing all this, but the circumstances that it led to resulted in them changing. And we're getting to this here coming up in the next few paragraphs. Next paragraph, Morrow told Detective Teets she never met David or Rania and had never been to Comel's house. Detective Teets also reported that Comel told Morrow, quote, that her husband got a multi-million-dollar movie deal to make the next Spider-Man movie. Ms. Crowley told her they would be moving to California. She later learned Ms. Crowley moved to Apple Valley. And so there's a bunch to unpack here. And some of it's miscommunication, but I also think that it could be taken that way when a couple get together and friends, they just chat once a week and they just go over some top level topics, and they may get the story wrong. They may have heard it wrong or heard it incorrectly. So we know they moved in 2013, December of 2013 to Apple Valley. And now we're September of 2014. So they already were there. They didn't move, again to Apple Valley, as it says. It just says that they moved to Apple Valley, but they were already there. Now, Kamel and David were interested in exploring possibilities to move to California. So that part is true. We had shown the email in the past as far as working with the realtor over there in the LA area, where they were looking at houses and homes and getting some idea of possibly moving the family out there. So that part is correct. The fact that Morrow had never been to the house or never met David or Rania makes sense. They were just dietitian friends. I don't think I know a lot of other my wife's friends at her work, and I've never been to their house and met their kids. And so I think that's a very common thing here, that she would never have a reason to come on over and visit or meet the husband or the baby. So that kind of makes sense. Now, she said that her husband got a multi-million-dollar deal to quote, make the next Spider-Man movie. So I did some homework. This is 2014, Greg. This next Spider-Man movie that came out was 2017, July 7th, 2017, and it was called Spider-Man: The Homecoming. The Homecoming movie came out in 2017. That was budgeted, had $175 million budget to make that movie. As far as I know, David had nothing to do with that at all, and he probably never did. I'm guessing this Casey Morrow, or her name is, either got it wrong or heard it wrong, or maybe I don't think Kamel would have said it that way. She would have known, because Kamel was very much in the loop. He was working on a movie. He did get a contract, and it was multi-million-dollar. So we know those three things are true. We're talking maybe was that he signed with MEG, the mics. And so it was nothing to do with Spider-Man, but it was making a movie. He was busy, and he was signing a contract and possibly move to California. Those things were true. So what are your take on that, Greg, as far as kind of the miscommunication?
Yeah, I found that pretty interesting too. Now, there was a Spider-Man movie called The Amazing Spider-Man that did come out in 2014, it looks like. And of course, we know the Amazing Spider-Man 1 came out in 2012. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out in 2014. Those movies weren't too good. Like, I don't know. Some people loved them, some people did not like them. But that was pretty interesting too, because I think there's at least 2 times that it's mentioned that David, by 2 separate people, that David was working on this Spider-Man movie, and I believe it was by 2 of Kamel's friends too, who had made that same comment. But yeah, I mean, the one in 2017, that was a Sony / Marvel. So that's when Spider-Man started moving into the Marvel verse, basically.
Right.
So with the whole nother Spider-Man. So I don't know. I don't know where that would come from, but that's pretty interesting that you have 2 people that are on record saying that same thing. And then we know on David's laptop, I'm not sure if it's the one found in the kitchen or if it's the one found in his office room, but there is a Spider-Man soundtrack that is actually in one of those screenshots too. So I found that pretty interesting.
Now, the two comments I have got to make is, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the detective hearing this and thinking, wow, what now? The guy who did all this was part of the Spider-Man movie? He was making it? What would go, I'm thinking of in Officer Teets' shoes, just thinking, I'm trying to go through and ask questions about this case. I'm trying to solve this homicide, this suicide of this depressed guy with no money. And now I'm hearing that he was making the next Spider-Man movie. And he could have looked him up himself at the time and found out that budget was $175 million budget in Hollywood for Spider-Man. And the one in 2014, had already come out and was made in 2014 and was already in the theaters.
That's true.
So when she says he's working on the next, her word is the next Spider-Man movie. It wasn't relating to the 2014 version because that came out. And the other comment I've got is what you just hit on. No one else in this case mentions Spider-Man except for two of Kamel's friends. Now, we know that David talks to his father potentially and says that he left the contract, walked away from the contract. It wasn't going to make it work. Now, whether that was what he actually said or not, it could have been, but he was saying that he distanced himself and pulled away from it. We know that's not true because he did get the contract. He was moving forward with it. So he was telling people a half truth or a half lie or something just so they wouldn't know the truth. My question is, did he and Kamel agree with that? And maybe Kamel was doing the same thing with her friends, giving a little white lie, a little half truth, because they didn't want really anyone to know the truth. Even their close friends. David was telling one story to one side of the family. He didn't get it. He got offered the contract, but he backed away. You know, we've been hearing that from day one from the Gray State Goons that nothing ever happened and that all was a lie. But the only two people we hear from that says the Spider-Man movie was Kamel's friends that she told. So it makes me believe, or the possibility, I guess, that if Kamel was leading her friends down a half-truth and a half-lie path, because in this state of mind at the end of the year where they were really trusting no one, it sounds to me that they were not telling anyone the truth. I got the contract to make the Gray State movie with the Mikes in Hollywood. That wasn't being told to anyone. So Kamel was saying story A, David was telling story B, and it leads me to the fact that maybe it was lined up enough that they were both giving people half-truths because either they didn't trust anyone, they didn't want anyone to know what was going on because they didn't know where the leaking was coming from or who were the people they trusted or who wasn't. So they were giving both sides of the family a half-truth. What's your thought on that?
I think there's probably some truth to that. I also think that the way that this report was actually written is a little vague, and it may have been written to kind of make it seem like that, well, here is some other deal, or here is David lying. Here is David saying that he's doing these things and he really isn't.
Illusion of grandeur kind of thing.
Yeah, he's involved in all of this, but he really isn't. The other thing is the way that it's written. This report is kind of vague because the way that I interpreted this report is when he's talking to Casey Morrow, is that everything David is saying about this deal is before they actually move to Apple Valley in 2013. So when it's kind of weird because he just kind of, oh, well, there's this, there's that. It's not really like, okay, this happened first, this happened second. And even in this book, you'll probably notice that too. And that could be throwing some people off too, to say, well, obviously they moved to Apple Valley later on. So this comment about the Spider-Man movie had to have happened, from my view, it had to have happened in 2012 or 2013, which would kind of be before this next Spider-Man movie came out, which was the biggest flop probably of all of the Spider-Man movie films.
So you're thinking the correspondence back and forth was more than likely 2012 or 2013, referring to the 2014 movie, and had nothing to do with them in 2014 being up to speed with the weekly update from Kamel and what she was really going through in the year 2014. This was before that, even when they were living in an apartment in Minneapolis before they're moving to Apple Valley in their Rambler on Ramsdale Drive. Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's just phrased a little weird, and he did it in his report, and I made the same fault. I did the same bad thing in my book with this timing, and I did not explain that in the book correctly, like I probably should have.
So overall, it gives more of an illusion that they were not really that close. They were in the dietitian classes and the meetings and the groups that they did, but they were not very close friends at all. If this drops off in 2013 before they even moved to their house.
Yeah, it's more like, you've been part of different groups. I've been part of different groups where you go and you meet at a restaurant or at a coffee house or something like that. I mean, how close are, hopefully you get to know people and you become close and everything. But we don't know how close these two really were, but it's interesting that this person, why is this person mentioned? What is Casey bring to this case?
Yeah, it
And it's,
seems almost like nothing if that's the case. And this is really far removed, a very distant person. And with going through and calling close friends and relatives and coworkers, how did I think I see what you're saying? How did Casey Morrow even make the cut for this
yeah.
investigation? If she's 3 layers removed from friends that they haven't talked to 2 years ago, wouldn't they be interviewing closer ones?
Yeah.
Good point. Good
Yeah,
point.
and the only thing that I can think of is they're trying, like they've already said that David is guilty. So they're looking for things. They're desperately digging for things that may line up with that. Here you have two things that line up with that. You have David talking about becoming, working on a Spider-Man movie, which he's never mentioned that in any of his social media. I've never seen that in his journal. I think it would have been in his day one journal or something like that. He would have talked about it if he was actually working on that. Just my guess. But so it makes David seem like a liar, a fraud, somebody who was making things up. So obviously, whatever deal he had, he didn't have the Spider-Man deal. So whatever deal people think he had with the Gray State, he probably didn't have that either. So it sets
It
that
helps
up.
discredit
It helps
him.
discredit that, and it also helps discredit her, because we have all of these Gray State goons, all these people that are saying that not only is David actually distancing himself, but his wife is too. And so they want to bring that in because they want to show, who is Kamel distancing herself from? Well, here we have one other person, because Kamel didn't give her phone after October of 2014. This can line in with that weird theory that David and Kamel were planning this and were shutting everything down, giving away things, giving away books and stuff like that, because they knew that they were going to do this, which also doesn't line up with what the police say. But a lot of the Gray State goons think that too. So
Now, let me ask you this. I'm not sure. Maybe we can get someone to comment in on this. But as a detective on a police force similar to the size of maybe Apple Valley is, they're doing this case. That Detective Teets gets, maybe his assignment was to get comments from 3 or 4 people, and maybe he went down the list and called and contacted 15 friends, didn't hear back from 13 of them. And the 2 we heard back from were Casey and this other Heidi. And maybe, well, just to get my homework done, I'll fill out the forms and talk to them and then check it off the list and I'll be done with the case. Rather than following up with everybody that's important with it. Like you said, if they knew the answer, they already knew how they were going to deal with this. They were just doing the interviews essentially to plug in the fact that, hey, I did some homework here. Not really following up on what really happened, but hey, this is 2 or 3 years ago, but you know what? It works for me. I'll hand it in to my boss, and hopefully Gummert will accept it, and we'll move on.
yeah, but
Because
give
I
him
don't see
a nice little star in the hand.
I don't get a connection here with the Casey Morrow at all, with anything to do with anything.
Just that, yeah.
And maybe that's the one he had done, and he never heard back. And did a couple follow-ups with other people, and they never called him back. So he said, "Okay, here you go, boss.
That's true.
I'm just getting my homework done."
I could see that too.
But it doesn't add much value to the case at all. It adds value, like you said, Greg, as far as complementing the narrative, the lying, he was a failure, none of the stuff was true, he was faking it, they were distancing themselves. Well, maybe Gummert said, hey, this lines up, I like this, let's use it. It's a couple years old. No one needs to know that, though. Let's just put it in the paperwork as substantiating our belief, our concept of what happened here.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. That's interesting. So now, Morrow, continuing on, Morrow also stated Kamel talked to her about quitting work as a dietitian and mentioned Rania suffered from autism and Asperger's. That comment reminded me of something Kamel stated about reversing Rania's autism. Now, this is true. This is an actual statement. Now, as far as her quitting work as a dietitian, that could be true. We've also heard that she wanted to quit to focus on writing a book, to author a book, and going into her own baking business and making cupcakes. We know that all this could have been true. Continuing on, it says, on September 5th, 2014, Kamel left a comment on the fathead-movie.com website. Fathead is a documentary made in 2009 by comedian Tom Naughton. The movie is described as a response to another documentary film, Super Size Me, where, quote, a comedian replies to the Super Size Me crowd by losing weight on a fast food diet, including plenty of double cheeseburgers and fried chicken, while demonstrating that almost everything you think you know about the obesity epidemic and healthy eating is wrong. So that's the movie. If you watched Super Size Me, that'll make sense. And if you watch this Fathead documentary that kind of counters that, it'll make sense. So she writes the following comment, quote, Tom, I watched your movie, Comel commented, when I was in my first year of graduate school majoring in public health, as well as finishing up my internship to become a registered dietitian, end quote. So at some point after moving to Minnesota, Comel Crowley enrolled in the University of Minnesota, where she earned a degree of Master of Public Health on October 31st, 2012. And I think just from living here, I do believe that college at the University of Minnesota, that program for dietitian is very good, very highly respected as well. It's a top program, possibly in the nation. But I've heard many good things about that school. So Comel was, once again, very bright, very smart, high IQ, and then got her master's there.
And it's
She
probably
said,
not a cheap school to get into, right? I
nope,
mean, you got to
nope.
have money.
And so all this, it makes sense. So this is what she was doing. She already had her degree from Baylor University in Texas. Now she goes to the University of Minnesota, a Big Ten school, and then goes into the dietitian, public master of public health. And so it changed my life, she says, Comel said of the documentary. I have lost 25 pounds, reversed my rheumatoid arthritis, my daughter's autism, and this whole journey started with your movie. None of my education helped me personally, end quote.
Well,
Very
that's
popular
interesting.
there. That's a lot there. What do you think, Greg, on some of those comments?
Yeah, definitely. I think just mentioning that, it's like almost like, well, I can see why she may have been moving away from the dietitian thing. Maybe there's many reasons why she may have let her license lapse, right? Because these are not federal licenses, these are state licenses, right? So if she's moving, if they're planning for their future, and if they're moving to a different state, my guess is she would have to let her Minnesota. I don't know if she'd have to let the Minnesota license lapse, but you would, because you're not going to be there. And then you're going to move to a different state, et cetera, et cetera. So I found that pretty interesting. But both of the documentaries, I haven't seen both of them, but I've heard a lot about both of them. But she is very high on this. But I think the main thing that I took away from this comment from her, and thank you to who, I think somebody posted this in the group. That's the only way that I knew about it. I don't remember.
I may have done that
You may have
way
done.
early on. I was doing some research on Comel, and this came up, and I got a screenshot and sent it to you right
Yeah.
away, because I'm like, this is very telling on so many levels.
Yes, because it was the whole does Rania, is she on the spectrum? Does she have it, et cetera, et cetera? We got a lot of those things where people saying, no, she wasn't. Well, she looks like it. And it was like, I even got a little bit of flack from people asking me not to put this into the book, to not go there. But we need to go there, because if the daughter was on the spectrum, then that needs to be in this book. That's the way that I personally felt. So I did end up keeping this in this book, because here is Comel saying that she cured her daughter of autism. That's a huge statement. I didn't even know that you could do that.
Correct.
Can you cure somebody from autism?
She just simply said, she reversed it.
She reversed it. Thank you.
And essentially what you're saying is that it fixed it, it cured it. Now, many, when it first came up, I think they thought that she was a special needs student, slow or lagging in some categories on the special ed spectrum. She was really on autism, which people didn't know, which was with the higher end spectrum as far as being almost gifted. And so that was some of the conflict that was going on in the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group, as people didn't want us talking about this slow or special needs child. And we find out later that after doing the research, she did or was, diagnosed with autism, and at the higher level. She was in a gifted program for school. She was very bright. She had a very high IQ. So it helped us understand the concept there. Now, None of this had anything to do with the death or the murder, mind you. It's got nothing to do with anything. But there was problems as parents dealing with her as a child was difficult. It sounds like once she got to figure out the eating habits and the nutrition and things like that, it helped it. It reversed it. Everything got better. But the only way it got better is Comel thinking out of the box. Once again, she's taken all these classes, all these courses, all this book smart, all this book study. And she says, you know what? I don't know if I trust it. I'm going to start watching some other documentaries, going outside the box and seeing if that'll help. And it was true. That to me shows me she was a critical thinker, not just taking everything as gospel that the professor tells her or the books that she reads tell her. And she says, everything I learned, it was nothing from my background. And I got a master's. I'm going through a master's degree program in this topic. Nothing that I learned is from what you told me in the documentary that helped, and actually, in fact, helped me lose 25 pounds myself.
Yeah.
So that's what I like about Comel, out of the box thinker, a critical thinker, and goes on, instead of keeping it inside, she goes on and makes a public comment using her own name and everything on a public website on a comment section. Love it.
Yeah. And the thing that I still am not sure of is, when did Comel see this film? This film called Fathead came out in 2009. It's not clear when she actually saw it. We know when if she's commenting on September 5th, 2014, can I rightfully assume that she had just seen it and was fired up about it and wanted to leave this person a comment on it? So I wasn't able to really say, well, Comel saw it on this day or on this time or what this year, right? I really don't know, but she made this comment. As long as thank you for making sure that we had the date of when she made the comment, because my guess would then be she had recently seen this and was like, wow, this is a big thing. But it could have been at any time. When did she feel like she actually reversed her daughter's autism? To me, that is still a big question, because the school that her daughter was going to wasn't like a special needs school, right? This was I think you've covered this previously about the school that their daughter was at.
A private school that required a tuition, and she was in pre kindergarten. She wasn't even a kindergarten student yet going to a public school. She was going to a school that required the payment of a tuition, while at the same time, everyone is saying how desperate and bankrupt David Crowley is, and they're sending to their child to this expensive school with the tuition besides. So this helps answer a lot of things. I would guess, Greg, on your comment, the only times I've ever left comments on a website for a movie or a documentary, and I've done it plenty of times, it's immediately after watching it. I don't do it 2 years later. I don't do it 5 months later. It's usually the day, if not 2 days after watching it and having something change your life like that. I've done that myself, where it's like, wow, I'm going to leave a comment. But I think she would have wrote, I just watched your documentary. I just watched it. I just completed it. Here's my thoughts. She just simply says, I watched your documentary. So we don't know officially. My guess is that she had just done it recently. It is the only thing I couldn't imagine is going back to a documentary and making a post on a public website 3 years later after watching a documentary and saying how it changed your life. Maybe possible, but not probable. I'm guessing it was recent.
Yeah, maybe if she felt like she had reversed her daughter's autism around this time, then maybe she felt like, okay, this is a great time to make to put that comment out there.
After it was completed.
After she felt like, okay, Ranya's doing much, much better. I feel like she's not on the spectrum now.
You're right. It could have been later, because it would taken all this time to take effect.
Right.
Whatever how long she would did that to change her diet, and the daughter's diet.
Yeah. It's hard to say. It's speculative. Gotcha. But like you said, it's not really relevant to this case. This was one of those things that I struggled with. Should I keep this in or should I not keep this in? But I felt like it was so crucial to this timeline of what these parents were doing. Had she have just, cured her daughter, or reversed, like you said, thank you for correcting, reversed her daughter's autism, isn't that more planning for the future, right? They're not planning, okay, well, we reversed her actual autism, but hey, we're going to go ahead and kill her anyways in a couple months. You know,
Yeah,
it doesn't
I'm
make
glad
sense.
you kept this in here. The comment itself I like because it shows it's very transparent what type of person Comel is by how honest she is in his comment to this person she doesn't even know.
Yeah.
Yep, I like it. I'm glad it's in there. It does confirm, you know, I was glad when we saw this too because it did confirm it. You know, we didn't know at the time about the Asperger's or autism and the spectrum or special needs, but here we get this comment that shows exactly that she does have it.
And maybe that moved her away to the alternative medicine field too.
Correct.
You know, maybe she saw in 2009, it kind of opened up her mind about it, and just slowly but surely. And at some point, she wanted to make sure that she reached out and thanked this guy who created that movie, Fathead.
And she had, you know, it admits too that she had rheumatoid arthritis.
What is that? I'm not too familiar.
I don't know. I've heard it.
I know arthritis, but that's about it.
I have heard the phrase before. I'm not sure myself, and hopefully maybe someone can comment on that. But she said it reversed it. I don't know. But there was she calls it her whole journey, her and her daughter, this journey that helped me. And it helped me personally, but none of it from all of her education had anything to do with it. It was the documentary.
Which also makes it seem like maybe she was studying health for a long, long time. It was, you know,
And it was an interest of hers as well. It's obvious that it was a very interest to her to do that. And they were, once again, it leads to another cementing the fact that they were very involved as parents. They were very active. They weren't just sitting back waiting for things to happen. They were vested in their child. They were very good parents, looking up these things, finding out different things, trying things, and it was working. Now, Tom responds. It goes to the next paragraph. It says that Tom Naughton responded to Comel's comment within the hour. Quote, "Thank you, Comel. That is outstanding news about your daughter. Too bad I'm just an overweight comedian, or I might have actually done you some good." That's pretty good. That's pretty funny from Tom. But once again, within the hour, he responds back about that movie. Now, we get this person number 2 comes to light. Another person who reached out to investigators was a former business partner of Comel named Sarah Johnson. Ms. Johnson could not give a time frame as to when she last had contact with Comel. Once again, it's very fuzzy, just like this Casey Morrow. We don't know when it was. But she wanted to give Detective Gummert, wanted him to know that Rania was the center of Comel's life and that David was, quote, crazy, controlling, and worried about government control. Now, this eats me up at a couple levels.
Yeah.
It already makes me discredit Sarah Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
It already makes me discredit her. And maybe she's not to be discredited, but it already, just because of this slant that it gives. And so she says, number one, I'm not sure when I last contacted her. Once again, someone dies, a brutal triple homicide. You're going to go back to your calendar, your address book, and say, wow, this person died a horrific death. I last talked to this person this date. I last emailed them this date. You're going to want to just go back and see, when did you last? And he asked, when did you contact her last? And she says, I don't know. I don't know when I contacted her last. Now,
that's pretty strange. I mean, you would, like you said, you would definitely know. You would want to know. You'd want to figure out, when did you last have contact?
What was my last text? What was my last email? And then you'd have the information, especially when you're about to pick up the phone and call the detective and say, hey, I've got information on her. You don't want to get your ducks in a row, put some bullet points together, get some facts together on a piece of paper to relay that back to the detective. It sounds like she just picked up the phone and called and really didn't have any information. It kind of said, I don't know when I talked. Now, once again, both with Casey and with Sarah, this is 8 years later, Greg. If these two were more than willing to come forward, it would be great for us to get them on a show and ask some of these questions directly, not to shove anything down their throat, but just to see, how would you respond to some of these things that we're asking in today's world? How did you get into contact? Did you offer up and say, hey, I've got information on Comel? Or did the officers call to you and you just simply responded back on a phone call to say, here's what happened, here's what I know? She goes on to say that Rania was Comel's center of her life. Now that is true, right? I also think she was the center of David's life.
Right.
But the center of David Kamel's life, and she was a loving mother. Yes, all that stuff is true. Now she goes on to say that David was crazy. Well, is that true? It sounds like that's an opinion. He's controlling. I don't know. Maybe that's still another opinion. And worried about government control. Well, that's true. But all three of these things here from Sarah, I think, is how anyone would respond if you were a normie talking about someone who's into conspiracy theories. You're going to say he's crazy, weird, says weird things, posts strange things on social media, and is worried about government control. They're kind of wacko. This is what she's saying, is what it looks like to me, coming from a normal person, a normie saying something like this about someone who's awake. This is how I think most of us would be described as. Now, she's very true that he was worried about government control. That was the point of the movie: the injection, the digital currency, the scanning of the arm, having the implant in there. That's exactly what he was talking about. But none of those things are incorrect. Now, but would he seem and come off as crazy and controlling? Maybe. But I think he's asking her, how well did you know Kamel, and what can you tell me about Kamel? And here she darts off saying negative things about David right off the bat. I think the focus for her was, how do you know, is what the officer wants to hear. What can you tell me about Kamel?
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. Like, if you don't even know the time frame,
she detours right away.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. But I mean, I'm sure that the cops pressed her. Well, okay, maybe you don't know the exact time frame. Can you give us a year? Can you give us a decade? I mean, obviously, it had to have been within the last couple of years or so. You guys are business partners or former business. When did the business end? When did your relationship with her end? How well did you know David? If you think David was crazy, if you think Kamel knew that that Rania was the center of Kamel's life, how well did you know them? How much time did you spend with them? And like you said, it just kind of glosses over all of that and gets to what they want to hear. The police want to hear this. They want to hear that Kamel is very close with her daughter, so she would never do this. She would never be part of this. And they want to hear that David is crazy and controlling. And so that will subconsciously go into the mind of people that already think David is guilty. David is a bad guy. How could somebody do this? How could you do this to your child? And they'll point to this and say, this is more proof that David did this. And that's it, because they're not really interested in
I think, to your point, is this, who was the officer here for this one?
This was Detective.
Well, regardless, it looks like
they
got the information and gave it to Officer
Gummert. This was Gummert.
And he's like, okay, this is good. It's not like, hey, I should go back and get some further information and more details on the business, what the business they run, when did it start, when did it end, what kind of business relationship do they have? But he gets right to the answer as far as, well, David was crazy. Okay, that's all that I need now for my report. I'm going to continue on. And so that's what we see here over and over from the Apple Valley Police Department, from the detectives. Not getting the full story and then coming to a conclusion is already having the answer and then backing into the comments that are good. Okay, that's all I need now from you. You gave me what I wanted to hear. It lines up with the narrative. Let's move forward.
And I don't think
the Sarah Johnson was never asked any hard-hitting questions, I don't think.
Well, these are all quotes from the cops too. It's very rare for them in their reports to put real quotes from people. And we have heard from other people, even from the neighbor, Judy Prochnow, who said that what the police wrote in their reports was not true. They did not get it right. They were summarizing. And even from her view, some of the things that they said that she said that her husband said were not true. They got those things wrong. Well, if they got those things wrong from the neighbor, I mean, are they summarizing these things? And so it would be interesting to hear from Sarah Johnson, her own quotes, which may be in the documentary.
Sarah, the important thing, the thing that I would like to get here in a perfect world is to get the audio from those interviews, Detective Gummert, Sarah Johnson, right? Sarah Johnson, and get the audio. It may be a 45-minute interview, Greg, that's all recorded. And maybe this was just two quotes, or the two quotes that helped the most, and that was it. She may have said how great David was and what a great father David was on the other comments, but it didn't make the report. It didn't.
Right.
It didn't make. I'd like to get the dictated everything that was in that interview from Sarah Johnson, not just the two things that point to David being crazy, because now people read the report and they think, oh, it's obviously David's a nut job. Well, we know already now that he didn't do it. So it's irrelevant if he was a nut job or not. The question is, why wasn't more of that in the police reports? Why wasn't more detail given? And I don't think that would be bad for us and in fact, we did, request at one point the audio and the video of these interviews, the interrogations, the witness statements. Well, we're not going to send those. Those are saved in the server, but you guys will get the police reports only. Well, what's in those audio reports that you don't care about? You can send us the MP3 file on a CD or a jump drive, and we could listen to it on our own to get our own conclusion. Those things are out there. That's public information on a case like this.
Right. I mean, even a transcript,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they would charge us for it and everything. They'd let us know how much it would cost. But even a transcript,
I would like to get the transcript of the Sarah Johnson interview.
That'd be good. That'd be good to get,
Wow.
as long as they recorded it too. That's the other thing. Now that should be in the police report. It makes me want to go back and actually look, because some of the time they do say this was recorded by blah blah blah, and it's stored on this server or something like that. So hopefully that's
I have seen
there
those too. They're stored on
Okay.
server X, and this is where we saved it, and the recording was shut off at this time, and it was on recorded on video or on audio. It's stated in the report. So I don't know about this one in particular, but I would have to imagine she said more than that in a conversation with Gummert. So continuing on, middle of page 167 now, it says that Sidra told me, Detective Gummert reported, quote, in the October of 2014, David called her father and in the conversation was swearing at him and advised him that they were no longer allowed to contact the family and that they were to leave the family alone, end quote. Sidra then called David and was told not to contact them either. So basically confirming it. That's when Kamel stopped communicating with her sister. Kamel would not return Sidra's phone calls or text messages. Now, there's a lot here, Greg. There's a lot packed in here as well. So what we know, what was going on in October of 2014, for those who don't know, is how did it go? David was refusing to pay the auto insurance on the vehicle, I think. Didn't want to pay or was refusing to pay. He didn't think I didn't needed auto insurance. Now, that's fine. But Mr. Alam gave him that car to drive. And so when he found out it was no longer insured and there was risk of it being towed or taken away or repoed or something, that's when Mr. Alam says, look, you've got to give me that car back. Remember, they had the drive. Sidra had to drive up to exchange cars.
Mm-hmm.
David's action by refusing to pay the insurance resulted in the reaction by Alam saying, I don't want that on my record with one of the cars that I have the name and the titles in my name. I want it back. We'll give you a different car, whatever. You can still drive a car, but I don't want my personal car to be not paid insurance. That's when they came back and says, oh, by the way, we're paying your phone bill. We're going to cut off the phone. Get your own phone bill if you're not going to be nice. And so that's when the phone numbers changed, when Mr. Alam says, we're going to be cutting off your phone as well. Get your own phone number. The bills are coming to us every month down in Texas. We're paying for it. You guys decide not to call us, then fine. You're not going to use your phone. I'm going to cut it off. That's probably what he said. That comment probably resulted in David swearing at Mr. Alam. It's the only thing I can think of. David would not normally swear. They got along good, and they got into this heated comment. But from Sidra, all we're hearing is one side. David getting mad, David swearing. This is once again what she heard from her dad. Not saying it's true or not, but I would say it's not one of those things not admissible in court. It's third hand. We didn't hear from Mr. Alam. He never said David was swearing at him on the phone call.
Yeah,
Not
you
saying it
actually
wasn't true, but this is secondhand information now, is what Sidra's saying. Now Sidra's mad because Kamel won't talk to him. She calls David herself and say, "What's the deal? Why aren't you going to talk to us?" He says, "I'm not going to talk to you either." So it confirmed it. They weren't communicating. But what she doesn't say here is that the car was going to be switched, the phones are going to be shut off, and that's why David got upset. I'm not saying anyone's right or anyone's wrong here. They're both all around it is it's not correct. But this is Sidra's version of events.
And what's interesting is when you talked with Kamel's dad and asked him about this, and he, from what you said, he doesn't remember David calling and yelling at him, right?
He said on the conversation that I had with him on the phone is that we got along great. We were good friends. We were buddies. We respected each other. I don't think he ever got mad at me once. And I said, how about this phone call? How about this phone call when all the swearing took place? He said that I don't remember him ever swearing at me. So once again, was Sidra making this up just for the appeal of it, to make it sound good? Was there yelling? There could have been. Was there an argument? There could have been. There more than likely was something. Now, once again, you can talk to two people after having an argument, and one person may say there was no argument. The other person say, well, he lost his cool and went off the hook. It's all how you interpret things and what you're used to. Going off the hook is maybe means something different to the next person. And maybe she was overhearing this conversation with David, and they were yelling and arguing that maybe it was all in a controlled environment. And Mr. Alam says, I don't remember any of that even happening. He was never swearing at me. So once again, it sheds now Sidra in a poor light, even though that's maybe how she accurately recalled it going. True. But it was still not accurate. It's how she perceived it. You know, she's still in high school at this age. Now she's very close to Kamel. They would talk and text every day, like best friends. And so they were each going to be in each other's wedding and whatnot, and very, very close. So when this did happen, it did take Sidra aback. This was her best friend. So she talks about the swearing and leave the family alone. Now, this is also, we know that the mother, Naila Alam, was going through this chemo and the treatment for her cancer that was going on. And they probably said, look, the only time you call is to worry about your phone or the car. You're never calling to ask about your own mother or mother-in-law. Well, then don't call here no more. And then David probably said, that's fine. Then don't call here. Leave us alone. Leave me alone, or we'll leave you alone. I don't know how it went, but something ended with leave us alone on both sides of the aisle. So they were going through a lot of things. A lot of turmoil was going on between the mother in dealing with the cancer, the car situation, the phone situation that the Alams were paying for. The Alams down in Texas now are paying the bill for the Crowley family in Minnesota. And they get a car from the Crowley family, from the Alam family in Texas. Now, we just got done talking last month, that Mr. Crowley, Dan's own father, is a multimillionaire. Well, if he ever needed a car, wouldn't he get one from 30, 40, 45 minutes away, get an extra car, get a cell phone plan? Could his dad pay for it? He had the money. They had the wherewithal. So this leads to the much bigger question, Greg, is David and Kamel felt much more comfortable asking for help, asking for assistance from the Alams when his very own family is 45 minutes away.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a huge point. They were very close. They were what I would call a real connected, real close family. Yes, they'd have the good times or bad times, whatever. But he gave them the car. They were paying the cell phone bill. So, and they're living in Texas, and these guys are in Minnesota. So they were very close as far as a close-knit family. And Mr. Alam had this perfect scenario of this son-in-law that he got along real good, and they shot pool together, drank beers together, and they talked business, and they got along really good. That's a very damning point when you look at Dan Crowley Sr.
Yeah.
With his own son, had none of this. There was no connection like this. There was no real life connection. And that's why the discredit of these various texts from Dan Crowley Sr., various phone calls, and how much of a loving dad he was and how much he loved his son, that all falls along the wayside because it probably was not the case.
That's probably why you don't think the camping trip. I remember you brought that up in the last show. You're like, this camping trip sounds odd.
I don't think there was any truth to the camp. Dan Sr. taking David Crowley and his family on a camping trip. I don't buy that either. I don't think they've ever done those things.
It's
The
pretty
only
interesting.
camping trip we heard about was years ago at the church youth group, and something negative came out of that
Right.
with the teens. So I don't think there was anything with camping going on at all. But all those things are said to shed Dan Sr. in a positive light. So it makes me to believe that they're inserted on purpose. They're inserted. They weren't real. They were not legit. And when they're inserted, it's not true, which means now you're lying. Now the question is, why are you lying in a triple homicide case? Why is anything being lied about at all? And all of it comes from, the one side of the family. So Sidra's having a tough time dealing with this, communicating. Kamel would not return Kamel's messages. Now, we also know at the same time that the mother, Nyla, was trying to get some chemotherapy for her treatment. And David, we know, and Kamel, we know, are very much into dietitian, healthy eating, healthy intake to your body, and nutrition, not having chemicals and not having chemotherapy x-rays come into your body that could help you live, but are harmful to you. We know that they were against her form of treatment when she agreed to go on chemotherapy. David and Kamel both says, we don't agree with that. We're out. If you're going to go that route, good luck. You're on your own. So we know that was another source of conflict as far as not talking, not responding to texts. Sidra, I'm sure, was all in. All her chips were in by saying, Mom, get chemo. Kamel's off on this other tangent. David is doing this whole thing. This was not just because of some bad argument on the phone, is what I'm saying, is how the families stopped communicating with each other. Many, many things were going on. They did not even agree with her treatment for her cancer, ovarian cancer that she had.
Yeah.
Now the next,
I think we'll go one more paragraph and then we'll shut this down, because 2 paragraphs down we get into the car. I'm glad you brought up the car thing, and I think that'll be.
Yes, and it gets interesting here. We're wrapping up on the top of the hour. Continuing on, it says October 1st, Danny Mason received an email from David's lawyer. The email, quote, Detective Booth reported, was asking for Mr. Mason to release any rights he had as an actor in the movie so that David could take the script and move a different route than what was originally planned, end quote. Danny Mason did not reply to the email. So Greg, talk about turmoil. Talk about lots of things happening with the family, the personal family, the in-laws, the job, the contract, all this deals. The lawyers are involved with the project, and now he gets. This is Gislason. Adam Gislason was the lawyer, I think, for David Crowley. Sent the email to Danny August Mason. Said, here's what we need you to do: is release your rights. He didn't respond to it. So this was October 1st. We know he didn't respond to this. October, November, and halfway through December. And that's what led to the precipitous to all this stuff. But this is,
I thought David sent that back in August, right?
I think he had it and sent it in August already. And maybe sending it in August and September didn't get any traction, any response. So then in October, his attorney sent it to maybe spark, hey, we need to move on this.
Yeah.
What's the answer?
There was some talk. There was you have the back and forth between David and Danny August Mason that happens in September, and then all of a sudden, I think it jumps to December, if I remember correctly. So when it's like, well, he's talking about October here, October 1st. He's very, he has a date for this letter, or I'm sorry, for the actual email. I don't know if we have that email directly from David's lawyer
I don't think so.
to Danny August Mason.
But
there may be more that we don't have too. But.
And so this is Detective Booth. And so the big takeaway from this is, even though Danny August Mason and David are going back and forth and butting heads to some extent, Detective Booth is now in that kind of trying to sort it out. And a good detective, maybe Booth is or not, but his actions certainly didn't show it, would delve into this more. I want to know more about this contract. I want to get more details. What was the deal? What was all this going on about? Because he would have found that this ties directly to the motive.
Well, yeah. And if this was the same, if Detective Booth was the same person that talked to Danny August Mason when Danny Mason said that he was nothing but a quote unquote actor, then why are they even talking about these rights? This detective should have picked up on that too. Wait a
Well,
minute. I thought you said you were just an actor. Now you're saying there was this email you guys are talking about. You need to sign these forms. Why would David ask you to sign these
from a
forms if you're just an
business, from
actor?
a management, from a a leader, an officer of the company, and
Yeah.
so that's where I think Booth should have been jumping in with both feet to say, okay, now this doesn't jive, this doesn't
Mm,
make sense, and you're headbutting about this stupid email, and who only knows is if did Booth contact Adam Gislason, the
mm,
attorney, to say, help me sort this out. What was all this emails about? I don't see any evidence that that took place. I don't have any support that Gislason was ever reached out, the attorney. And he was that attorney, working out of the IDS tower in downtown Minneapolis that David's
mm.
father mentioned, meeting with some big
Oh.
shot attorneys was Gislason, a very high end attorney. How much time did the Apple Valley Police Department spend with Gislason?
Hmm.
Any?
That's a
That
great question.
if I'm a detective, you're going to spend a lot of time with the lawyers to kind of sort things out here with things going on. I don't know if they even made a phone call. Now I don't know that, but we don't see anything in the reports that substantiate that. Maybe they contacted and Gislason said, I don't want to talk. I don't want to comment on it. At least we could have gotten that in the police report. We don't get anything.
That would have been great.
We just get a comment saying that Danny August Mason refused to answer the email. Well, fair enough.
And then there's no, as far as we know, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but as far as we know, David and Danny August Mason don't really talk until, or they don't exchange emails until December
I
at some
think there's
point.
there was the December 6th, I believe, email with the
Mhm.
deadline of the
Okay.
16th.
Ah, okay.
And then the 16th, coming and going at the evening of the 16th, Danny August Mason saying, "Hey, we got to do this. We got to work something out. I'm up against the deadline. Let's get an answer on this."
Hmm.
And then all we know is that a week later, the bodies are found. It leads us to assume many things, which we shouldn't have to. There should be things like that. But once again, if we get some of these people to come forward, I would say it'd be great to get Adam Gislason to come on a show. How
Absolutely.
much time did the Apple Valley detectives give you? How much time was involved? Was this? Would be good to know. But that's looking forward to the next episode, Greg, because this is going to get very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. With the car thing, it was like, oh, the car is this, the car is that. So I'm glad that we have some of this. There may even have been some stuff that didn't get brought in here. But we could, yeah, I look forward to our next show too, my friend.
All right. Thanks.
All right, brother. Until next time, thank you everybody for joining, for watching. God bless you all.